So welcome everybody to another webinar. This one's a little different because one of the things I've been finding teaching the classes and also speaking at conferences and talking to people is that there is a genuine concern about a lack of expertise and the fact that the expertise is disappearing. So this session today will deal with succession planning and obviously the importance of succession planning for ongoing competency, but more importantly, ongoing ensuring our plants run safely, but also to ensure that companies continue to be successful. Because at the end of the day, companies are all about the people and the quality of the people, whether they're producing a product such as control systems or, for example, petroleum products, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, whatever. It all relies on the quality of the people. So as usual with any of these webinars, for those of you that are not familiar with Exeter, I will give you a short introduction. Those of you that are familiar with Exeter, apologies, you've seen this before, you're going to see it again. So here at Exeter, we again are built upon the basis of knowledge and the expertise of our people. And the company has been around for about 20 years, originally founded on the premise of helping manufacturers to understand the requirements of IEC 61508, as it first came out in '98 and then the first edition was in 2000. Since then, we've grown significantly. We've encompassed more than just doing safety certification of products. We now have a complete suite of tools to help support the full safety life cycle, from doing your H&RA, your hazard and risk analysis, all the way through to doing your data collection and performance measuring. We've also developed the capability of doing certification from a cybersecurity point of view for products, or the 62443 requirements, as well as providing full lifecycle services from a functional safety, cybersecurity, and an alarm management position. The reason being, those three disciplines are very, very tightly coupled, and their life cycles are tightly coupled, and this will help us with ensuring our overall process safety. We are a global company. We are established all over the world. Last year, we added the Mumbai office in India, and we're beginning to consolidate a bit more and looking at different regions to expand. How do we measure our success? Well, right now, from the point of view of the product certification, we do have the largest market share. 2 out of every 3 instruments that are certified have been certified by Exeter. And that's a significant achievement. We've also moved away from being initially owned by 2 people to being more employee owned. So this is another part of Exeter's succession plan, is that the 2 founders are still working at Exeter, but they will not be working for too many more years because they're well into their retirement ages. They just happen to enjoy what they're doing. But in the meantime, to ensure the longevity and the continuation of Exeter, we've migrated to become more of an employee-owned company. So again, coming back to the purpose and the point about succession, the strength in Exeter certainly is in the employees and the knowledge that we have. We have over 100 global experts now, and we've done more than 1,000 certification and assessment projects, as well as with our tools modeled over 500,000 SIFs. So we see that as a means of measuring our success and, of course, making sure that we can continue to be successful, and also, more importantly, to help our clients be successful. Here again, reference materials. We have written quite a few books, and we have a lot of information available through our website. some of you that are regular attendees of these webinars and know us very well have made good use of the website. All these webinars we do are recorded and they're available through YouTube, and you can get to them through the website, the exida.com website, by going to the resources tab and having a look under the resources tab for the webinars, and they're listed under categories. So there's product, there's functional safety, there's cybersecurity, alarm management. So plenty of different topics under those that you can refer to. We've also put on the website a number of white papers. These are readily available and they can be downloaded. And we also publish a lot of blogs. The books you see here are available through the web store, and our Excellencia tool has the built-in SERH, the Safe Equipment Reliability Handbook. So this has all the failure rates of the typical devices that you would find in any process application. As for me, well, some of you again know me pretty well, but others might not. I've been around for over 40 years in industry. My original start was as an electronics and software engineer, designing early microprocessor-based equipment for fire and gas, ESD, and avionics. And from there, I've moved into more of a corporate role when I was with ICS, and then I left ICS and came to the US 22 years ago and started working for an automation company. And then 6 years ago, came back into safety when I came to Exeter for the first time. I have different roles. One of my primary roles is to look after our end user business, as also from a global business development perspective, as well as being one of the primary instructors on the FSC 100. And as I said, some of you probably have been on the courses and probably know me. So with the introduction complete, let's get down to the meat and potatoes, as they say. So from a succession planning point of view, there are certain challenges and needs. And we've only need to look at the last few years, and those that are based in Houston know this only too well, that when the oil price dropped, there were significant layoffs. One of the estimates I saw over a period of time was about 750,000 related oil and gas related jobs disappeared in Houston. Now, of course, the oil price has recovered and companies are now looking to recruit again. Well, the problem is, of course, that many of the people who were laid off, and what tends to happen is that in these types of cutbacks, the most expensive people are usually the most knowledgeable and most experienced. And so if they are let loose or let go, as the phrase goes, they don't always want to come back. Some retire. Some say, well, I don't need this. I want more stability. And so they'll seek alternative industries to work in. So the oil and gas, unfortunately, industry has a reputation for hiring and firing. And the problem is, if you lose that experience, and we all know, those of you that are involved in either refining or in oil and gas, know only too well that knowledge and experience is crucial to ensure safety. And sometimes we find that companies try to find people, not literally off the street, but people with very little experience. And this is an ongoing issue, is how do you ensure that you can maintain that level of knowledge and safety? The other thing is, of course, the number of engineering graduates. Engineering is not necessarily a popular subject amongst the young of today. And so the number of engineering graduates is an issue. The plus side, of course, is that with the advent of the 2007 recession and the earlier one a few years ago, a lot of people are not retiring because they can't afford to. So This presents an opportunity. It presents an opportunity from the point of view of if they're staying a little longer, then this gives companies time to plan for their eventual retirement, so they can start having younger, less experienced people work alongside them. Industry in general has been watching costs, although there are some co-op programs that do go on. We here at Exeter have a very good co-op program, and in fact, we have, in this past year, we've started taking on younger, inexperienced people to start training them up. As I mentioned to you earlier, Exeter is built on knowledge and experience, and most of us have over 30 years experience. So that means that we're heading, if we're not already getting to the edge of the baby booming retirement age, we're getting close to it. So clearly, we want to ensure the longevity of the company, and therefore we need to start bringing on early career people to start developing and honing their skills. And so this is one way of doing it with the co-op programs. Just out of interest, quick poll. How many of you in your companies have co-op programs? Show of hands. Okay. Yes, I think it's interesting. There's a mix there. Some do, some don't. It's something that is a good way of getting them. The old expression is get them young. If you get them interested from a young age and early on, and they find out whether you're a good company to work for, and likewise you find out whether they're a good fit for the company, and that could be a pretty nice marriage. So it gives an opportunity, but not, as I said, not a lot of companies do that. Another problem, of course, is that there's been competition from companies. So clearly, if companies are now looking to recruit but can't find people, especially for experienced and high-level positions, then there's the prospect of poaching. And I'm sure some of you have probably seen this, where companies poach key people, lure them away with either signing on bonuses or some incentive to come and join. So all of this means that companies need to be thinking about their futures and planning for that. This means that you need to understand the demographics, and this is also a particularly sensitive subject because it's very difficult to ask people about their age or ask them when they plan on retiring. And most of the time, people will give maybe 6 months to a year's notice of a pending retirement, which may not be enough time to get somebody up to speed, especially depending upon the position they hold in their organization. And if it's in the refining side of it, if they're a very experienced process engineer, that may be very difficult to suddenly replace that knowledge. So part of that should be to consider a 3 to 5 year pre-retirement window where you can start to have somebody shadow them, do some shadow training, and by that you allocate a less experienced person to work alongside them to learn the ropes, as it were. And companies also need to consider their recruitment program. How do you find new talent? So there's different ways of doing that, of course. The college job fairs is one way of doing it. And when I was in the UK, as general manager of ICS technology, I used to go to the local schools, the high schools, and give talks and explain what we do and why it was an interesting career and things like that. And also attend the job fairs to see what talent there was out there. For more experienced people that you need, then of course you can use headhunters or recruitment agencies, but there's a fee involved in that, of course. And even if they find people, there's still a prospect that they may not be a good fit. Social media is another one that's very, very popular, as we all know. If you're registered on LinkedIn, there are all sorts of adverts on LinkedIn and people trolling, looking, especially recruitment and headhunters keep looking. Facebook is another means of doing that. So the important part of this is how do we retain our key people? And what training do we need to do? So some companies utilize a job rotation scheme. And in fact, the last company I was at, for the senior management positions, they would do that. They would put people in senior managers in certain positions for 2 years, and then they would rotate them. They'd move them to a different position. So it gave them an opportunity to hone some of their skills and learn more of the business. The same could be done. You can start looking at maybe rotating some jobs to keep the interest, especially for those who are keen to learn and keen to get on. Compensation, of course, is always a key part of staff retention and training. And sometimes companies, like I said, here at Exeter, we have employee ownership. So some companies can give some form of employee ownership or profit sharing to help make them feel part of the family, as it were. So these are all things that companies need to consider and think about. So the challenges, of course, with recruitment planning is how attractive is the company to its employees in terms of what sort of benefits are they offering, salaries and bonuses. But also, it's not just the monetary side of it, it's facilities. I went to a company a couple of months ago, and they had a very nice gym facility, which their employees could use any time of the day, lunchtime, the evenings, if they were on shifts before they started their shifts. Having a cafeteria that's subsidized is another means. And when I was in England at ICS, we had a very nice canteen that was subsidized. So you could get a very nice meal for £1 or £2 at the time. I know I'm showing my age now, but the other thing is, if it's a Fortune 500 company, some people are attracted by the big corporations. The other thing is good career development. So for example, if it's a large global oil and gas company, then what are the career opportunities? And depending on which level you come in at, what type of job you've got, we're probably looking for some career path. And this again is when you're looking at attracting youngsters or younger people to come in, you want them to be there at least 3 to 5 years or longer. I mean, in the old days, it used to be you were at a company for life, but with these modern times now, that doesn't necessarily happen. And as I mentioned already, there's competition. So what is the prospect of our key people being poached? Do we have sign-on bonuses, or are they being offered sign-on bonuses? Other things as well as transportation assistance. Some companies have buses, or so their employees can meet at a certain point and the bus picks them up, brings them in. Travel passes, things like that, to help them get to where they need to go. So the whole point of all of this is that we're trying to, again, build our competency, build the knowledge. This is where, if you like, the crown jewels comes, is in the key people that we have. So what is competency? So to my way of thinking, competency is a blend of the knowledge, experience, and capability that you have. You can spend many years working in a particular job role, learning the ropes, learning the hard way, making mistakes, learning from those mistakes. And again, the old adage of, you can't put an old head on young shoulders, which is very true. So it does take time to hone those capabilities. It's interesting that they talk about if you want to become proficient, for example, in a musical instrument, the minimum that you need to put in to become proficient is about 10,000 hours. So you have to work hard at learning an instrument. If you want to do that, the same applies to how you apply yourself to working in your main role. And then it's the ability to demonstrate practical applications of the knowledge and experience. It's one thing to have the knowledge, but how do you use it? And can you use it in a way which is efficient? And again, that comes mostly with experience. The other thing is that the quality is also very important. You may find that it takes an experienced person half the time to service a piece of equipment than it would with an inexperienced person. So competency is very important, and this is all part and parcel of the succession planning, because we know that if we have our key people with 35, 40 years experience, they're going to be pretty good at what they do. So therefore we have to develop our competency, and we know that this is the key to ensuring a company's success. This is why in 2016 edition of 1511, there's this primary requirement for competency and competency development. It's very important. Primarily because they recognize, the committee recognized that there is a shortage of this, and the fact that we're losing some core knowledge and competencies as people retire or leave the industries. So it's an ongoing challenge, but it's also an opportunity. So we need to think about how we document. So you can document in a number of ways, of course. You can have a certificate or a diploma that says you've achieved a certain knowledge level on a course, but it could be through on-the-job assessments. It can be through tests, whichever way it has to be done. The other problem is, how often do we need to do this? So here again, the standard talks about you have to do periodic. And I love that word periodic. It's very, very nebulous, because what does that mean? Well, you have to decide, or the company has to decide, how often it needs to do these periodic assessments. Once a year, twice a year, depending upon the role, depending upon the level of knowledge and experience. With less experienced people, you might want to do it more often than you would with the more experienced people. And the other thing is to look at developing mentoring programs. Here again, when I was with ICS, we had a mentoring program. In my last company at Mezzo, I was involved in the mentoring program there. And this is a good way of assigning a mentor to less experienced or new hires to help bring them along, show them the ropes, help them understand what the role is, and develop their competency in that role. You can also look at creating on-the-job training programs, as well as holding workshops and lunch and learn sessions. We do that here. We have regular lunchtime lunch and learn sessions on different topics. So these are ways and means of helping to develop knowledge and pass on knowledge. One of the fundamental problems with engineering and engineering companies in general is that the culture tends to be quite power-centered. And I say in general, so not all companies are that way. And some people regard knowledge as power, and they don't want to share it. I'll give you an example. When I was I think 3 or 4 years into my career, and I was working at this avionics company. And one of the guys there, I asked him, okay, how do I do this? And it was software at the time. And he was very hesitant to tell me. And I kept pushing, and in the end he said, look, he said, nothing against you, he said, but if I teach you how to do that, then why do they need me? So sometimes you'll get that pushback where people are fearful that if they train somebody up, they're doing themselves out of a job. But again, if it's a succession plan towards a retirement, then that shouldn't be the same sort of issue. So let's look at what 1511 says, and this is the extract from the standard itself, and it talks about persons, departments, organisations involved in the SIS safety lifecycle activities to be competent to carry out these activities. So again, it defines that as needing to document the competence of these people through the engineering knowledge, training, and experience to the process application, engineering knowledge, training, experience appropriate to the applicable technology used, and again, engineering knowledge, training, experience appropriate to the sensors and the final element. So the equipment is very important, and especially with new equipment. It's oftentimes new equipment, if the engineers aren't familiar with it, then that can be a potential problem. And then the safety engineering knowledge from the process safety point of view, knowledge of the functional safety requirements are also something that has to be documented and shown. So this expands greatly on what was in the original 2003, where it just said people had to be competent to do the job they were doing. So this is a far more definitive requirement. So personnel competency management, the theory being, of course, competent people make fewer mistakes. Notice it says make fewer mistakes because we all make mistakes, no matter how competent we are. And the knowledge and training applicable to the process application is specifically very important when it comes to PHAs. We all know that a PHA relies heavily on having your most experienced and knowledgeable people available. They have to understand the process, they have to understand or have familiarity with the equipment and some of the problems and issues, and from an operations point of view. So all of these people need to be involved. But many, many times, and we've seen it, that when it comes to PHAs, you might get one or possibly two experienced people, and the rest are all made up of what we call newbies, the less experienced. The reason being is either the company can't afford to put all these knowledgeable people in a PHA for 5 days or whatever, or they only have a small number of people who are really that knowledgeable. So this is very important. And of course, engineering knowledge, training, experience applicable to the technology. This is very, very important. So we need to make sure our people are competent because, again, what are we trying to do? We're trying to manage the risk of systematic faults. So if we don't have competent people, if we don't have well-trained people, we are potentially opening ourselves up to future issues. So this is why this succession planning is very important. If we know we're going to have experience walking out the door within the next 5 years, we should be thinking about how can we mitigate against that. If we put it into safety parlance, there is a definite risk, and so we need to mitigate that risk. And again, it talks about procedures being in place to manage competence of all those involved. So here again, we have to come back to the procedures to make sure the periodic assessments should be carried out to document the competence of individuals. So here we're looking at that periodic. And again, because this is a performance-based standard, the company has to define what that means in terms of frequency and how they do it. And again, those of you that have been on the course and heard my webinars before have heard me bang on about the 3 Ps that make up the systematic, which is personnel being properly trained and competent, making sure that we have procedures that are correct and being followed, and we have paperwork to show the traceability. So we have competency documentation, we have skills matrices, or we have a skills with development program assigned to it. So all of these things are very, very important. Okay, so the purpose of all of this Succession planning is a vital part of business planning, especially in the process and oil and gas industries. Very, very important to make sure that we have some form of succession plan in place. And again, how many, little show of hands, how many of you know of or have or are involved with succession planning for your company? Show of hands. I don't see any hands going up. Yeah, I've got a couple of comments here. Yep. Okay. I see somebody does. Yep. It doesn't surprise me. It's an interesting one. That I had this conversation a lot with companies, and to ask them about these things, and it's interesting the responses I get. Some look at me as if I got two heads. What the hell am I talking about? Others say, well, that's HR's problem. But it's not really. I mean, if you're managing, then you need to be thinking about how that's going to be dealt with. So, of course, we have to have a plan in place to make sure that if we know we're going to have imminent retirees walking out the door, that we have some form of shadowing or some form of handover to ensure that that doesn't disappear altogether as soon as that person retires. And it's interesting. Here's a true story. It involved a test engineer. Back in the day at ICS, when we were doing our ESD and fire and gas systems, we had designed a couple of 30 amp power supplies that were current sharing. So this guy used to test them, and he retired, and a new guy took over. And what we found was, after a while, we were getting reports of the power supplies not performing properly. So again, I said, okay, let's have a look at it. And we went over and we had a look. And what we found was that in order to current share properly, there was a particular link that had to be fitted. And this link wasn't fitted. It wasn't fitted because it wasn't shown on the drawing. However, the guy that retired, who'd been doing these power supplies for 10 years, knew that the link had to be fitted. He also knew the drawing didn't show it, but he didn't worry about it because he knew it needed to be fitted, so he fitted it, but didn't obviously make sure the document was updated. So that knowledge walked out the door. And of course, the new guy coming in didn't know that. We didn't know that because as far as we were concerned, that the drawing was correct. So things like that can happen. So if we ensure that our employee retention is a high priority, it will help us with preserving that knowledge. Because retirement is one way, poaching or leaving is another way. If people get disillusioned, if they feel that they're not going anywhere, if they feel they're not appreciated, that can lead to leaving, especially if they're reasonably well experienced and they're an attractive employee to other potential companies. Then it's very easy for them to walk out and get into another role. As well as companies need to be attractive to graduates and new hires. That's always a challenge. And as I said, it depends on the culture of the company. It depends upon what they offer, things like that, the benefits, the compensation. All of these things are an important ingredient. And as we've seen, we have to have now assessment and ongoing training programs as under 1511. So we have to have a means of demonstrating that the people working on the SIS are qualified to do so. They're competent to do so. And that stems not just from a design perspective, but also from an operational and maintenance perspective, which is more important in the long term because, of course, the SIS is going to be in the operation and maintenance phase, the longest part of its life cycle. And finally, the personnel competency is vital, again, for the current and future success, as well as helping us to prevent systematic issues. These systematic issues cannot be understated enough. Very important. And obviously, if we don't have properly trained or knowledgeable people, we're going to have a potential problem further on down the line. So again, this comes back to the need for having proper succession plans in place, proper development programs for ongoing competency development. Okay, any questions on that? Any questions? Anyone got any questions on? So one question, who is responsible for ensuring this? Well, again, it should be management, of course. Depending on who, where, what level. If it's the plant manager should have a very keen interest and stake in this. He needs to make sure that his team are properly trained and competent. So this would need to be developed. And again, if the company is large enough that it has a human resources department, then it might be that the human resources has a program in place for covering all of this. And it would be worthwhile if you're in a company that has human resources, you can always go ask them and say, what are we doing about succession planning or retention? This is it's an interesting question. Good. Any more questions? Okay. All right. What have we said here? Can you give some best practice examples of competency management programs you've seen with clients? Well, that's an interesting one, because sometimes what they do is they have well, the roles and responsibilities is also a key part of this too, is that they'll have roles and responsibilities defined, then they'll have some form of competency matrix to show, and then they use that to develop their training programs. So in terms of best practice, the way I would approach it is to look at having roles and responsibilities defined, looking at the core competencies or skills required for those roles, and then look at where people have holes and create a training program to plug those holes. What if the most competent person of a company leaves for another job and leaves the company with only supervision practitioners in his place? Yes, that's another potential problem. That's why you have to look at your most senior and competent people and see, okay, making sure that they're happy in what they're doing is number one. And number two, making sure that there's some form of shadowing or program to bring on younger or less experienced people who are keen to learn and want to grow. It's all part and parcel of how attractive is the company. If there's supervision practitioners, then again, you're going to be struggling, because now you've got to try and make those people become competent very quickly, and that's not always an easy thing to do. Unfortunately, there's no magic wand. That's why companies need to have plans in place. They need to look at, almost, if you like, do a risk assessment on the personnel. What happened, or what if this person leaves? How do we compensate for that? Where does it leave us weak? What do we need to do to strengthen that? So what layers of protection do we have in effect? So, you know, it's interesting, companies apply all of this to the safety instrumented system and all the hazards, risk assessments, etc. But we should do a similar thing when it comes to the core competencies and the core people that we have. And not a lot of companies think about that. It's a good question. Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay, well, if you have questions, if this has piqued your interest, you've got some more questions, you can see my email there. I'm always happy to answer emails when I get them after the webinars. I promise to try and get back to you as soon as I can, and I will get back to you. So let me know if you have questions. And I thank you for your attendance and look forward to you attending webinar in the future. Thanks a lot, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.